Welcome to the Reflections Podcast, where we reflect on the writings of the fathers and mothers of the faith. Today, we delve into a profound work of Christian mysticism born out of a time of intense suffering. In 1373, a revelation of divine love was shown to Julian of Norwich. This revelation came in 16 showings, and Julian had actually desired to be sick so that she could be joined in the passion of Christ, and it was from one of these illnesses that she had these revelations. Through these showings, she saw the precious crowning of thorns on Christ, his face changing colors during his passion, his scourging of his tender body, and the shedding of his blood. And she took this as a sign that Satan is overcome by the passion of Christ and the working in our souls. So beyond the suffering, she saw God's boundless goodness and learned that God makes and keeps all things. Central to her experience was the deep comfort she found in God's love and the understanding that God is the ground of our prayer. Without him, prayer is nothing. The showings revealed the Trinity and the unity between God and man's soul. Julian learned that God is the maker, the keeper, and the lover, and the true rest is only found in him. She saw that sins are forgiven by mercy and grace through the virtue of Christ's passion. Her writings explores the deep mysteries of God, emphasizing that love was the Lord's message. Julian herself saw that our faith is our light in our night, and this light is God himself, our endless day. So let's listen in to this discussion on Julian of Norwich's revelations of divine love.
Welcome to the Reflections Podcast. This is where we reflect on the writings of the fathers and mothers of the faith.
Indeed.
And today we're diving deep, really deep, into a text that's just foundational for Christian mysticism. It's Revelations of Divine Love by Julian of Norwich.
A truly remarkable work. And Julian herself, well, she's fascinating. A 14th century English anchoress.
Anchoress, so living in solitude, dedicated to prayer.
Exactly. Walled into a cell attached to a church, usually. And her perspective, it was forged in a really intense time. The plague was ravaging Europe.
Right. Incredible suffering and uncertainty.
Absolutely. And it's right in the middle of all that, actually, during a severe illness of her own, that she receives these 16 divine showings, as she calls them. Very personal, very direct experiences.
16 visions. Wow. So our mission today really is to explore what these revelations tell us. We want to get into God's love as she saw it, this really tricky problem of sin, and ultimately where she sees it all heading our destiny.
That's a great roadmap. Her insights are profound.
Okay, so where do we start? Maybe with the absolute core of it all for Julian, God's love. It just pours out of the text, doesn't it? It doesn't sound like some distant conditional thing.
Oh, not at all. For Julian, God's love is, well, it's the bedrock.
Yep.
It's constant, unconditional. It's always there. Even when we suffer, even when we sin.
It doesn't waver.
Never. It's the foundation. It's what holds everything together, actively sustains creation.
Which brings us to that image she uses, the one people often remember, the hazelnut. Can you unpack that for us? It sounds so small.
It is small. That's the point. In one showing, she sees this tiny thing, literally the size of a hazelnut resting in the palm of her hand.
Okay.
And she wonders, what can this be? It seems so fragile, so insignificant, almost like it could just crumble into nothing.
I can picture that feeling. How could something so tiny last?
Exactly. And then the understanding comes to her.
Yeah.
It exists and it lasts for 3 reasons. Because God made it, God loves it, and God keeps it.
Made it, loves it, keeps it. Simple, but powerful.
Immensely powerful. It's not just a sweet image. It's quite a radical statement about the value God places on every single part of creation. Nothing is too small or worthless in God's eyes. It tells us to look for God in the small things, the everyday things.
And there's a real sense of closeness there, too, isn't there? God holding this tiny thing.
Absolutely. That hazelnut, held so securely, it shows both God's immense reach, caring for the tiniest detail, and God's immanence, God isn't just out there. God is intimately present, involved, holding creation,
Connected.
deeply interconnected, yeah.
And Julian pushes this intimacy even further. She uses language about God that must have been quite startling back then, talking about God as mother.
Yes, both father and mother. It's such a distinctive and, frankly, comforting part of her theology. She uses both masculine and feminine qualities to try and capture the fullness of God's care.
So not limiting God to just one set of attributes.
Exactly. She talks about the tenderness, the nurturing side of God. She even explicitly calls Christ our very mother in his wisdom and his loving care. It makes the divine feel so much more personal, more approachable.
So it's not just this abstract power, but someone you can feel truly close to, almost like family.
That's precisely it. She uses this wonderful English word, homeliness.
Homeliness.
Yeah, meaning that sense of deep familial intimacy.
Yeah.
Being completely at ease, belonging, like you're truly at home in God's presence. There's a courtesy, a respect, but also just comfort.
Wow. That kind of intimacy, though, it makes you wonder, how does she then deal with sin? If God is so close, so loving, where does sin fit in?
Ah, yes. The big question, how do you square this all-loving, homely God with the undeniable reality of sin and suffering?
It seems like a contradiction.
And Julian tackles it head on. She has this phrase that, well, stops you in your tracks. Sin is behoovely, but all shall be well.
Behovely, what does that mean? Like, necessary, needed. How can sin be needed?
It's a tricky word for us now. Think of it less like God wants sin to happen and more like sin is permitted. It occurs within God's larger plan, a plan that ultimately works towards good despite the sin.
Okay, so God allows it, but doesn't cause it.
Something like that. Julian is very clear. Sin is the sharpest scourge. It causes immense pain, suffering, self-hatred. It's terrible. But, and this is crucial, it cannot ultimately break God's fundamental love for us or derail God's ultimate purpose.
So the love is stronger than the sin?
Infinitely stronger. It's a challenging idea, for sure, but it offers this incredible perspective on God's sovereignty. It suggests even the worst things, the biggest failures, can somehow be woven into a bigger story of redemption.
It's not saying sin is good then. Far from it.
Absolutely not. She sees sin more like a privation, a lack, a falling short of who we are truly meant to be in God. It's not a thing in itself, but an absence of good, a deviation.
Like darkness is the absence of light.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. A wound, a failure to be whole.
So how does God deal with this lack, this wound?
With overwhelming mercy and grace. This is constant in Julian. God's response is always restorative. Mercy flows constantly to heal that wound, to overcome the lack, to bring us back into right relationship, into righteousness.
Is that where grace comes in?
Exactly. Grace is God's active power, God's loving help that enables us to turn back and be healed. Julian even has this startling image. She says that in heaven, the token of sin, the scar, is somehow turned to worship.
Turn to worship. How?
It's mysterious, but it suggests a complete transformation. That the very things that caused us shame and pain here become, in the light of God's love, monuments to God's incredible mercy and power to redeem. Like a battle scar becomes a badge of honor, but infinitely more profound.
That's incredibly hopeful, that nothing is wasted. Nothing is ultimately just meaningless suffering.
And it leads to another interesting point she makes, the difference between God's view and our view.
How so?
She suggests God judges us, or rather sees us, based on our essential nature, our core being, which she says is always kept safe and whole in God. It never truly sins in that deepest sense.
Our essence is safe.
Yes, but our judgment, our experience, is based on our changeable sense soul, our feelings, our actions in the world. We feel the fall, the guilt, the separation. God sees the deeper reality, the potential for restoration.
That difference in perspective is huge.
It explains why we can feel so wretched, while God's love, from Julian's perspective, remains constant.
Now, tied into this suffering and redemption are her visions of Christ's passion. You mentioned they were intense.
Incredibly intense,
Yeah.
very graphic, very physical. She describes the color draining from his face, the blood flowing, the feeling of his flesh drying out on the cross. It's visceral.
Why such detail? What was the point of seeing that?
For Julian, it wasn't just witnessing an event. She felt a profound union with Christ in that suffering. It wasn't just his pain. Somehow it encompassed all human pain.
So by seeing his suffering, she understood God's connection to our suffering.
Precisely. And she understood that we are united with Christ in his passion. We share in it. And through that shared experience, through understanding the depth of that suffering willingly undertaken out of love, we gain a much deeper, more intimate knowledge of God.
So the suffering itself becomes a path to knowing God better.
Yes, and ultimately to joy. That's
Yeah.
the paradox. The passion, the ultimate suffering, is precisely what transforms pain into the possibility of eternal joy and redeems everything. It's the turning point.
This connects to what she says about our souls, too, doesn't it? This deep connection.
It does. She has this concept of the soul as a made trinity.
Made Trinity, reflecting God, the Trinity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Created in the image of the unmade Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. There's this inherent structure within us, she believes, that mirrors the divine life.
And because we're made like that.
There's an inherent longing, a fundamental pull within the soul towards God. It's part of our design. She says the soul can never find true, lasting rest in anything created, only in God.
That restlessness we feel is actually a sign of our true home.
That's how Julian sees it. Our deepest substance, our core reality, is always rooted in God, eternally connected. The journey, then, for our sense soul, our conscious, experiencing self, is to recognize that connection and live back into it, to reunite with our substance.
And prayer is the way.
Prayer is key. It's the conscious act of turning towards God, aligning ourselves, opening ourselves to that union. It's how the soul actively seeks and finds its connection to God.
Throughout all this, the suffering, the sin, the journey, there's that phrase again, all shall be well. It keeps coming back.
It does. It's like a refrain, a constant reassurance given to her. In the face of everything, she saw the plague, the personal illness, the visions of sin, and Christ's suffering. This promise stands firm.
It must have been incredibly anchoring for her.
Absolutely. And it's not a naive optimism. She understands God sees our struggles, our tribulations with what she calls ruth and compassion, deep pity and empathy. God isn't distant from our pain.
God is in it with us.
Yes. And somehow, God uses these very struggles to prepare us for something greater, for a deeper joy, a greater bliss than we could achieve without them.
Even the bad stuff, the evil, she calls it the fiend.
Yes, even the fiend, the forces working against God's love, are ultimately overcome. Christ's passion is the decisive victory. That's why true faith, for Julian, isn't about always feeling good. It's about holding on to that belief in God's ultimate goodness and love, even when everything feels wrong. Trusting the promise.
All shall be well.
And all manner of things shall be well. That's the full phrase she often uses.
There's one more vision. Towards the end, this allegory of the Lord and the servant. What's going on there?
Ah, yes. That's a really rich, layered vision. It's open to a few interpretations, but generally, the Lord represents God and the servant represents humanity, or perhaps Adam before the fall, or even Christ's human nature taking on our fallenness.
And the servant fall.
Yes. The servant is eager to do the Lord's will, rushes off, stumbles and falls into a pit, getting badly injured. He lies there, unable to get up, suffering greatly. It symbolizes our human fall, our sin, our pain.
And the Lord's reaction.
This is the beautiful part. The Lord looks down at the servant, not with anger or disappointment, but with immense love, pity, and compassion. The Lord never blamed the servant for the fall, only feels tenderness. The Lord's gaze is entirely focused on how to restore the servant, how to reward him even more richly because of his suffering endured in love.
So again, it comes back to God's unwavering love and commitment to us despite our failures.
Exactly. It's a powerful picture of God's unbreakable commitment to humanity. The fall happens, the suffering is real, but God's intention is always restoration, healing, and ultimate glory.
Okay, as we start to wrap up our reflection here on Julian, what are the absolute key takeaways if you had to boil down her wisdom for us today?
Okay. Well, first, definitely the sheer scale and constancy of God's love.
Yeah.
It's unconditional, personal, homely. Nothing diminishes it.
Got it. Love first.
Second, that difficult but hopeful view of sin. Sin is behovely. Yes, it happens, it hurts, but all shall be well. It's contained within God's larger merciful plan. It doesn't have the last word.
Mercy overcomes it.
Third, our union with Christ, especially in his suffering. That sharing in his pain isn't meaningless. It's a path to deeper knowledge of God and ultimately to profound joy.
Suffering transformed.
Fourth, our soul's deep intrinsic connection to God. We are made for God, we long for God, and our true substance is always safe in God.
Our divine anchor.
And finally, underpinning all of it, that steadfast, comforting promise, all shall be well and all manner of things shall be well. Ultimate hope.
Love, sin encompassed by mercy, suffering leading to joy, soul connection, and the promise of ultimate wellness. That's a lot to hold on to.
It really is. Deeply comforting, I find.
It certainly is. And that leaves me, and perhaps you listening, with a final thought to ponder. Julian presents this God who is incredibly close, homely, yet also transcendent, the creator of all. How might embracing that paradox, God's nearness and otherness, change how you approach your own spiritual life, especially those times of difficulty? What does it mean to have a God who gets so intimately involved in our human messiness, both in making us and redeeming us?
That's a great question to sit with. And, the best way to explore it further is to actually read Julian herself, pick up revelations of divine love, or explore other mystics, the mothers and fathers of the faith. There's such a wealth of wisdom there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for guiding us through Julian's profound insights today. It's been illuminating.
My pleasure. Her voice is one we really need to hear.
Indeed. And thank you for joining us on the Reflections podcast. Until next time, may you experience the depth of that divine love Julian spoke of.
And so there you have it. Every month, I participate in a prayer time that uses Julian's lessons as a guide, and you're welcome to join us. You can find out more at the Kirby Lang Center. We have used her liturgy, and it has really drawn me closer to Christ, and I have found that I am drawn into God's presence and that I find rest there. So I hope that you will do the same. If you've read Julian, let me know your thoughts on our discussion. And if you haven't, then let me know if she sounds encouraging or convicting or something else entirely. And consider picking up her book yourself and reading and sharing your thoughts then. I'm praying that this podcast and these theologians are helping you to draw closer in intimacy with Christ as you are remade in his image. That's it for this week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week on the Reflections podcast, where we reflect on the writings of the fathers and mothers of the faith.